Thank you all for logging in. This is a very important time for us because we have the great pleasure and honor of having Ambassador Frederic Hoff with us. Frederic Hoff has been involved in Lebanon. I mean, you've seen his CV, but there are two things that I'd like to highlight, which are not part of his of the text. First of all, that he's been involved in Lebanon since the 1980s, and he's written a very important book on the Lebanese-Israeli border called Galilee Divided. I used to have a copy of that book, and I lent it to a Lebanese politician, and he never gave it back to me. I should have learned my lesson about Lebanese politicians since. But it is actually a very important book, and so he joins wide experience in Lebanon and in the region with the mediation he did for the maritime border. So Fred is now, Fred, you are a household name in Lebanon. You have many friends there. They all remember you very fondly. Everybody is very much looking forward to seeing you. And I wanted to well, before we start, I wanted to also say that you've been involved in several mediations, including with the Mitchell Commission on Palestine, and between and for the Syrian-Israeli peace negotiations as a mediator. You call yourself a soldier and a diplomat, and we call you a soldier and a diplomat and a gentleman at the same time. So thank you very much, and you're most welcome. Tell us the story. How did you get involved with Lebanon? What's that background?
Well, Nadim, first of all, you mentioned all of the various diplomatic ventures I've been involved in. I think what they all had in common, almost all of them, is that they did not end well. I should take full credit for things not ending well. Sometimes events in the region itself made things especially difficult. First, let me say what an honor it is to be with you and LAU students and others today. To the best of my knowledge, this is the first time I've ever done an LAU event. So this is something that for me is certainly very significant. On this story, I got involved in late 2010 when our ambassador to Lebanon at the time, Maura Connolly, someone I knew well, called me one day and said, "Fred, there may be a crisis brewing out here." Due to a potential maritime dispute between Lebanon and Israel, and she said, given your interest in boundary matters between these two parties, perhaps you could provide some mediating services. I resisted for a while. I knew nothing about maritime, maritime separation lines and the like. It's an entirely different world from land boundaries. But I was talked into it, and ultimately wound up, doing my best to try to suggest a compromise that both sides could live with.
Right. Now, I have a huge advantage, which is that I'm totally ignorant of any maritime law and boundary matters. So my my questions will cater for some of our audience. By the way, we have about 300 people registered. Many of them are people you worked with and we have the LAU Society for Petroleum Engineering,
Excellent.
who are a very active society on Instagram. They had an amazing discussion about this last week, and the international relations students as well, and several other people. So in my understanding, the key issue is your starting point on the land boundary.
Yes.
And I know you're very modest, but you are the expert on land boundaries. And to my knowledge, there is no problem between Israel and Lebanon about the boundary. I mean, it's maybe unrecognized, but we both do recognize the armistice line, and the 1923 line is still sort of more or less valid, with adjustments with the blue line, which is the Marek Golding line, isn't it? The UN Marek line. So is there a dispute about the land point to start with?
What we discovered in our mediation was that there were differences between the two sides about where the blue line actually specifically meets the Mediterranean Sea. Okay.
Right.
You know, the blue line is the descendant of the armistice line, which was supposed to replicate the 1923 international boundary. In fact, there are disputes along the blue line.
Yes.
There were disputes in the early 1950s when the United Nations tried to demarcate what had become the armistice demarcation line. But in our mediation, what we were able to do with the agreement of both sides was, when we got to the point where we could propose a compromise line of our own, we started that line 3 nautical miles off of Ras Naoura. Okay. And that was, and this was mutually agreed by the parties. So there was no problem with that. We just did not get into a dispute about which rock on the Mediterranean Sea, constitutes the blue line.
Right, because even at the point of the blue line, the UN station is on the cliff, which is about 50 meters away from the actual boundary. And there is a dispute. I mean, the Israelis consider the cliff as the blue line, and the Lebanese
as I recall, and don't hold me to this. It's been a long time since I've read the 1922 survey and all of that. But as I recall, boundary post number 1 is up above Ras Naoura.
Yeah, on the cliff.
Up on some high ground, yeah.
So choosing the, so we're talking about now we're talking about 4 different lines now, 4 different boundaries, yes? And you've chosen, by consensus between in your mediation, you've chosen a point in the sea. It was not one of the rocks that are now in dispute. It's nothing to do with Khelet, which is now where the Israelis are claiming that it counts as part of the boundary. Is it
not exactly part of the boundary, but it's a rather complex system that's used to try to project lines out into the sea. It involves reference points on both sides of the boundary, and the lines that are projected are supposed to be equidistant from these reference points. There were disputes during our mediation about the reference points. The Israelis, chose an island off the coast of Haifa. The Lebanese side agreed, but only assigned that island 50% weight in the calculation. The Lebanese chose a couple of reference points which were barely visible at low tide. The Israelis objected, but in the end, the Israelis accepted those reference points. So I think, in terms of the reference points, at least during the 2012 time frame, we came to something approaching a consensus. What we did in the end was from the American point of view, we accepted each side's reference points on its own side of the blue line and assigned those reference points full weight.
Right. Now, there's a further complication. We're building up to the bigger picture. There's a further complication, which is that both parties had separate agreements with Cyprus.
Yes.
And the Lebanese border with Cyprus slants downwards, the Israeli border slants upwards because of an island near Tripoli. Is that?
No. This is when Lebanon reached its agreement with Cyprus. Yeah. Okay, it gave full weight to a small uninhabited island off the coast of Trablus.
Yeah.
No, the dispute between the parties had to do with reference points selected, with the weight assigned to those reference points. Two conflicting lines were produced. That in turn produced a disputed area. Both lines were valid in the sense of proper cartographic and international law principles being applied. And this is one of the challenges in disputes of this nature, nearly all of which get settled amicably around the world. The problem is there is no cookie cutter, one size fits all formula that dictates how these lines are projected.
And looking around the Mediterranean, nobody has borders that are agreed. I mean, the only two in the Eastern Mediterranean region. There's only been there are very, very few agreed lines. I mean, the Cyprus and Israel, mainly Cyprus, basically, with Israel and Lebanon. But of course, there's the dispute with Turkey. There's Greece. There's Egypt. There's Libya. It's all.
Yeah, in recent months, in particular, the maritime situation in the Eastern Mediterranean has heated up considerably. Much of it has been in the form of a dispute between Turkey and the Republic of Cyprus. But of course, and in terms of Lebanon and Israel, there has been a renewed mediation over the since I believe September or October.
But the dispute between Turkey and Greece is also to do with islands. I mean, in the Aegean, there are all these little islands. Is that?
Yes, yes. This is an ongoing dispute in terms of petroleum deposits. However, I think the main aspect of the Turkish complaint with regard to Cyprus is that northern Cyprus needs to receive an adequate share of the revenues produced. I think that's basically the center of the dispute there.
Yeah. Now, why is the United States the mediator in all these disputes and not the EU, for example?
Well,
Because it's the
yeah.
Mediterranean basin, because of the Euro-Mediterranean projects and all that. How come?
Yeah, no, there are plenty of alternatives to the United States. The United Nations is a potential alternative. You mentioned the EU. The EU can certainly mediate. I suspect that in this particular case, the relationships, the bilateral relationships between the United States and Lebanon on the one hand, the United States and Israel on the other, produced a certain level of trust and confidence that made the United States the mediator of choice a decade ago. And again, a few months ago, but there's no reason really why that should prevail. The two parties are free to agree on any mediator.
Right. Because this morning I heard that in Brussels at the European Council, they're discussing Turkish relations and sanctions on Turkey, and they're discussing the Cyprus issue and the Greek issue, and the reply of the Turks is that they called for a Eastern Mediterranean conference on gas that would include everyone.
I see.
On that. This is sort of ongoing, like dispute discussions between the. So has there ever been a multilateral approach like that? Or is it?
Not that I can think of in this context. Without dismissing it out of hand. I would just say that the more cooks you have in the kitchen, the more difficult it is to come up with a coherent recipe. Israel and Lebanon have a discrete, well-defined difference of opinion about where a maritime separation line should be drawn, and my sense, whether the United States is the mediator or someone else, is that this particular difference should be mediated on its own merits without complicating factors being introduced.
I have one more slightly, I mean, we have three major issues, which is the diplomacy, the legal aspects, and the technical aspects. On the technical aspects, my last quick question is about that famous island where the Israeli minister went and had a cup of tea to prove that it counts. When did this spring up? Was it part of your scene when you were there, when you were?
Yeah, it was part of the calculation to the best of my recollection. Lebanon's position at the time was that this island, Tekhelet or whatever it's called, could be considered a valid reference point. But only with 50% effect on the drawing of the line. So, and again, this is to the best of my recollection. Tekhelet basically had full effect out to 12 nautical miles and then turned slightly to the south. Okay, so it has always, at least until recently, been part of Lebanon's calculation. I recall reading something a few days ago to the effect that the current position of the government of Lebanon is that that island should not count at all.
Yes.
I'm certainly not sure that I'm reflecting with 100% accuracy the actual position of the government of Lebanon, but if the island were eliminated totally as a reference point, this would indeed cause the line projected by Lebanon to bend even farther to the south. And again, based on what I'm reading in the newspapers, the effect of this is an additional 1,400 and some odd square kilometers being put in dispute,
which would include the Israeli field, one of the Israeli fields, which
this is my understanding, is that it would include fields already under development and providing production. Yeah.
Now, my understanding also in mediation of these matters is that one can choose a compromise line, or one can choose to do joint exploration, especially when there are fields that overlap, like we have with Cyprus and they have with Cyprus too.
Yes.
Has this ever been discussed? I mean, because some of our blocks, block 8 probably, or block 10 could overlap, right? I mean,
we tried not to get ahead of ourselves. Basically, the mission that all three parties were focused on was coming up with a mutually agreeable maritime separation line that the two parties would register independently with the United Nations. Now, there were a few discussions about what comes next. And what would come next would be an agreement between the two parties on something referred to as unitization, all right? Which simply refers to the fact that there could be valuable petroleum fields, natural gas fields, either directly under the maritime separation line or very close to the maritime separation line on both sides. And what unitization would involve would be the two sides. This is the normal formula. The two sides agree on a single energy company to do the development within a specified area,
right,
to market the petroleum, and to divide the revenues equally between the two sides. So at least hypothetically, if we had been able in 2012 to persuade the two parties to register the same line with the United Nations, a unitization discussion, direct or indirect, would have been the next thing on the agenda.
Yes, I'm looking. We have about 30 questions, but before we go to the questions, I want to touch on the second option more. I mean, there are three options basically: negotiations, mediation with and we couldn't have anyone better than you for that. The second is going to international law and giving international lawyers a lot of business, and they would take a lot of time, and the jurisdiction is disputed, and there are lots of complications.
And international law, basically calls for an equitable settlement of disputes of this nature, and those two words are, at least the word equitable is subject to all kinds of argumentation.
Yes, and so there's I mean, there's the UN, the ICJ, and there is the ITSOS, which is the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, ITLOS. Are these options that, I mean, are we all signed up on these treaties? I mean, are there problems there?
I think the essential problem is when you are shopping for mediation services in a dispute of this nature, it requires the mutual consent of the parties to the dispute
Beforehand.
beforehand. Just as the ultimate settlement requires mutual consent. Mutual consent is the key to everything here. My team trying to mediate this dispute had not a single word of criticism of the scientific and legal arguments brought to bear by both sides. I was highly impressed by the expertise brought to bear by the Lebanese team and by the Israeli team as well. But at the end of the day, one can make whatever claims one wishes to make. One can express a preference for a particular mediator, but in the end, this requires mutual consent.
Right. Now, I want to bring into the conversation my colleague Albert Domar, who is looking at all the questions and trying to join them in a way, to group them, because there's no way we're going to go through 30 or over 30 questions so far. So Albert, can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So would you want to give us some questions? Can you tell us who they're from also, please?
Sure. So a lot of people are asking about the current discussions. Ed Gabriel and Mohammed Sheikh, how do you think the current discussions are going? Mohammed Sheikh says, is the US as mediator biased? Ed Gabriel asks, will these negotiations be more successful than efforts in the past? Has anything changed in your opinion?
Okay, well, on that, as far as I know, and I should specify, I mean, truth in advertising here. I am not part of current negotiations, the current process. I am a professor at Bard College in upstate New York. I'm obviously interested in all of this. As far as I know, the current discussions have been suspended. My suspicion is that if the parties cannot be brought to closure in the next 60 days, that a new administration would make inquiries with both sides to see if there is any desire for the United States to continue this process. The person who has been designated by the United States to be with the parties at Naura, at UNIFIL headquarters, John Deroche has been U.S. Ambassador to Algeria. He is a very distinguished career Foreign Service professional. There is no reason, in my view, why he could not continue to play this role in a new administration if the parties want the process to continue. Is the U.S. biased? You know, all I can do is you know, speak for the time when I was in the middle of this process. The answer is categorically no. We sought a win-win situation that both sides at the end of the day could live with.
Thank you. Interesting that his name is Deroche, which is of the rocks, and this.
Yes. Yes.
Albert, I can see loads more.
Yes, there are definitely a lot of questions. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Sergio Halil is asking, if the negotiations were to go forward successfully, what kind of binding confirmation would be needed by respective countries and their parliaments in order to make the agreement fully applicable?
Wow, that's a that is a question that is probably well beyond my ability to give a specific answer to. You know, in the case of Lebanese and Israeli parliamentary actions. When I was doing this mediation, when the United States made its compromise proposal, the Lebanese Prime Minister at the time, Najib Mikati, had as his first task trying to get cabinet unanimity on this issue. He was making progress in that direction, but in the end, his government did not last long enough to bring it to closure. Now, there was within Lebanon some debate about this issue because some Lebanese political figures at the time were conflating the Lebanese claim line with a national boundary, okay? And, you know, a national boundary apparently changes there too would require a great deal of work in Parliament. Of course, you know, the Lebanese claim line was not a national boundary. It is what it is, a claim line. But I would presume that that in both countries there would at least be some parliamentary inquiries. There would certainly be interest in the compromise agreed to.
And we're still operating under the framework of 1701 in international terms.
Sure.
Which is not even a ceasefire. It's just a cessation.
No, but the line that was proposed by the United States back in 2012 would essentially be provisional in nature. Okay, it would be enough to give international energy companies the confidence to come in and help Lebanon fully develop its hydrocarbon potential without fear of an international conflict over whose exclusive economic zone begins here and ends here. At the end of the day, if 10 years from now, 15 years from now, there are normalization discussions between Lebanon and Israel. All of these lines could change. The blue line could change. But right now we're dealing with a situation that by definition is provisional in nature.
I can see in the notes Karma Ekmekji remembering the meetings you had with her and the late Muhammad Shatah, and so there are lots of things in the notes. We'll send you all these comments for later.
I would love to see them.
Ahmed is doing the synthesizing.
Yeah. Well, Muhammad Shatah was, I have known in my lifetime dozens and dozens of impressive Lebanese. Muhammad Shatah was near the top of that list, and it was a pleasure working with him at the beginning of this process while Prime Minister Hariri was still serving, Saad Hariri as Prime Minister. And, Muhammad Shatah's suggestion at the time was, and this of course is the business of Lebanon, was that any revenues ultimately derived be distributed directly to the citizens of Lebanon, following the example, I think, of the state of Alaska in the United States. His idea was let's avoid the politicians 100% and distribute the money straight to the people of Lebanon. He was a wonderful man.
There's a question from Nicholas No. He is saying, Ambassador Hoff, given that Lebanon, unique among states in the modern era, staked out a minimalist claim vis-a-vis international law and case precedents starting in 2007, what factors gave you confidence that your proposed split, well below Lebanon's minimalist claim, would work?
I'm not sure I understand would work in what sense. Let me just put it this way: both Lebanon's claim and the claim of Israel did not violate international law, cartographic best practices, or anything. They were different calculations based mainly on different reference points. In the end, after listening intensively to both sides, after multiple trips to the region, I accepted a suggestion made by our expert, the late Raymond Milevsky, that we propose something using an American methodology, a methodology that we use customarily when uncomplicated coastlines are involved. And this methodology produced a line that went in between the two lines. It came 60% of the way down from the Israeli line along the Cypriot line, and it would have accorded to Lebanon 55% of the disputed area.
Question from Nicholas Nassar. Have civil society actors been included in the mediation process? And do you believe, given the increasingly contested legitimacy of the existing government, that they should be? And there's a similar question actually about involving alternate actors in the negotiations from Bruce Stanley, who's asking, what weight do environmental issues, climate change, sea level rise, pollution have in the negotiations? Do you introduce those as mediator, as a representative of the international community?
Um, what I can speak to definitively simply applies to my term as the mediator in this dispute. Our talks, to the best of my recollection, were 100% with teams of negotiators and experts assigned by the respective governments. Whether it would make sense at this time on both sides, not just the Lebanese side, to include civil society actors, to include environmental experts. I honestly don't know. I hesitate, frankly, to make a recommendation on that, given the fact that I am not at all involved in the current situation officially or otherwise. My sense is that both sides do want to come to an agreed line. They obviously have sharply differing opinions on what that line is, where it is located. From a mediator's point of view, I think there is a natural inclination, frankly, to keep things as simple as possible. And in this case, it would involve providing mediating services between officially designated teams.
Just as a quick update, I think since you've been there, in case you, there has been a lot of civil society initiatives, some private sector ones, by legal ones, but mainly there is an association to monitor the government's work on that. It's it's headed by Lori Haitayan, who sent me a question asking you whether you'd be interested in coming back under the Biden administration. She's offering to go. Basically, that's...
No, frankly, I am already deep into planning for the spring semester at Bard College. Teaching Bard undergraduates is my mission in life, perhaps the last of my professional missions. And in terms of going back into government, my appetite for that is well under control.
Yeah, so I want to also mention that there's the Middle East Strategic Perspectives. They also do a lot of work on that. There's the Lebanese Center for Policy Studies, who have assembled a great international team of experts from a bit everywhere. So there is maybe because of our perceived weakness of our government, our civil society and academics are, I mean, there's also, of course, the Isam Faris Institute in Beirut at AUB who have a program. Our academics and civil society are very active in that, and it's good to recognize them now.
I think the recognition is merited, and it's overdue, and I certainly hope the government of Lebanon, and in particular those charged with negotiating this issue, with traveling down to Naura, sitting in the same room with U.S. mediator, with an Israeli team. I hope they are taking on input from these groups, because it could be very valuable in terms of forming a position and having attitudes reflecting Lebanese society and Lebanese opinion.
Sure. Albert, what's next?
So there's a question from Joseph Jabali. He's asking, Is it true, Ambassador Hoff, that your team reached an agreement back then, but that a Lebanese political rift between Bassil and Berri prevented the deal from concluding?
In April 2012, our team made a proposal to both sides, a compromise proposal. We met in London. We briefed each team separately. It will surprise no one to learn that both sides were deeply disappointed with our proposal. That each side thought that it was entitled to 100% of the disputed area. That's perfectly understandable. On the Lebanese side, there was I think probably the best way to describe it, there was a grudging but genuine appreciation for the methodology we employed in coming to our proposed compromise. I think the Prime Minister at the time was very serious about trying to work his way through cabinet approval of the proposal. It proved difficult. It proved impossible. The Lebanese government at the time just ran out of time in early 2013, to the best of my recollection, and then Lebanon went into an extended period of caretaker governments. So I think it was I would not assign responsibility to any one in particular. I think unfortunately there was a systemic breakdown that prevented approval.
There's an interesting question here by Fadi Daher about whether Parliament should ratify an agreement, which I want to add to about the different teams. I mean, we know that in Lebanon, it's now mainly the army that's leading the negotiations. How is it on? Are both teams in a way equivalent? I mean, are there counterparts in the teams, or are they totally? Do you have a diplomatic view and a technical view from one side and a military one on the other?
Well, during the time I was mediating, the Lebanese armed forces had the technical lead in working with British advisors and others to come up with the actual line, and that team was extraordinarily impressive. At the diplomatic level, at first, Hamid Shatta, the late Hamid Shatta, was my counterpart when Saad Hariri was prime minister, and then Joe Issa El Khouri became my counterpart when Najib Meati became prime minister. So yes, in those days. In those days, there appeared to be a strong, functioning linkage between government and the army in pursuing the Lebanese case. I confess I don't know what the organizational principle is right now. But there is a long and I must say noble precedent for the Lebanese armed forces, an institution I admire greatly, playing a central role in making Lebanon's position on this issue.
And on the Israeli side, it's also, do they have a, is it also the armed forces or?
No, to the best now there is I suspect there is, I think there is armed forces representation at the talks, but that is mostly a function, I believe, of the fact that the talks are taking place at headquarters UNIFIL in Naura, okay, but the Israeli side is I believe is mainly political and legal in these talks.
Yes. So Albert is saying that there are lots of questions about the islands and the new proposed Lebanese line.
Yeah.
I guess it's still ambiguous. It's all to do with that rock, right? It's still. What can we tell?
Yeah, no, it does. I think whether or not you include this island off the coast of Haifa in the calculation, the weight you assign to that island in the calculation, this has an enormous impact on where the line ends up. No doubt about it.
So we have,
but again,
Yeah.
bear in mind, if there is going to be mutual agreement on the line itself, obviously this implies there is mutual agreement on the relevance of this particular feature off the coast of Haifa.
So Tony Haddad is asking. Tony was the advisor of President Aoun when.
Indeed, I remember Tony well. Yep.
Yeah. So he's asking whether the half effect of Tekhelit as a compromise is a good compromise, and
well the half effect was the Lebanese position.
Yeah.
Back in 2010, 2011, 2012. Okay. And that is one of the factors that produced a disputed area of between 860 and 880 square kilometers. My understanding, and I have no definitive knowledge of this, being not being part of the process officially, is that the government of Lebanon now wishes to eliminate the island totally as a reference point, and this would cause the line to bend significantly to the south. Okay, in our proposed compromise, we said, look, we could be mediating this for the rest of our lives. Instead, let's assume that Lebanon is the United States and Israel is Mexico, or Israel is the United States, Lebanon is Canada. If we have an uncomplicated coastline, how would the United States draw the line? And this is essentially what we did. And we gave full weight to the respective references of
both
country on its own side of the blue line. And we did this not knowing where this line was going to come out. When this potential procedure was proposed to me, I asked the question, and again, this was Raymond Milevsky, our leading expert in the State Department on all of this, and he said, "Fred, I have no idea where this line is going to turn out. It's going to be somewhere between the two claim lines. Don't know where, but give me permission and to do the calculations, and I'll let you know in a few days. And it came out as a 55-45 split in favor of Lebanon. Now, I'm not going to sit here and claim that this is the final answer. If Lebanon and Israel can come up with a different formulation, if a mutually acceptable mediator can come up with a different formulation that ends with the mutual consent of the parties, I don't care if the Hoff line, which is better named the Milevsky line, I don't care if this becomes an irrelevant historical footnote. I think getting these parties to agreement so that Lebanon, years from now, as many as 7 years from now, can start bringing in significant revenue.
There's also the John Bull line, apparently, which is from the UK Hydrological Office. So there, you have the claim of having, like, was there a Mr. Maginot? I mean, the Maginot line, or
I do not know. I don't know.
So we have still too many questions but many of them, if I want to group them, talk about regional and local other actors, which is a euphemism for Syria, Hezbollah, the Israeli-Arab normalization with the Gulf. Sometimes we talk in codes.
Yeah.
And does this have a role? Especially, I think, the specific question about local actors, meaning Hezbollah, is a pertinent one.
Well, all I can say, Nadim, is during my time as mediator, it was quite noticeable that Hezbollah did not play the role of a negative actor in all of this, not at all. I seem to recall a speech, I believe it was a speech given by the Secretary General at one point of Hezbollah, saying that Lebanon should exercise, its maximum, diplomatic efforts and so forth in standing up for Lebanese rights. There was no threat of violence or anything else. Now, is that still the attitude of Hezbollah? Honestly, I don't know. Is that still the attitude of Iran, which obviously would have a major impact, I would think, on the position that Hezbollah takes? I don't know, but I think we'll be able to have an idea about this before long, depending on whether these discussions resume, and whether or not they focus on the area that has been traditionally, at least since 2010, 2011, been in dispute between the parties.
Well, another theme that's emerging is whether all this, I mean, these negotiations and recognizing the border in a way, indirectly, constitutes a form of normalization, and whether it is basically a recognition of.
I can't, obviously I can't testify to what, people in the U.S. administration, may have been thinking in relaunching this effort. My sense is that from the American perspective, this is not part of a broader normalization agenda. I honestly don't think it is. What the United States has in mind is helping these two parties come to a provisional arrangement in the Mediterranean Sea, just as there is a provisional arrangement on land with the Blue Line, an arrangement which in the fullness of time can be changed if and when there are normalization discussions between Lebanon and Israel that enabled the parties actually to put signatures on the same piece of paper,
Right.
designating boundaries.
Well, Fred, thank you so much. I mean, you have a standing invitation. You have a job you have a job offer from Lebanon. You have a standing invitation from many friends there, and we've promised to release you back to your students after 1 hour. And we all thank you so much for doing this and being so.
Well, Nadim, it's been my pleasure entirely, and I do say very sincerely thanks to all the attendees for the tough questions. Some of them were not very easy at all. And believe me, at my age, it's not the easiest thing in the world to reach into the memory bank.
Thank you.